Today we're going to make an attempt to look at Joshua 5 and 6. We may not get quite that far, but let's see what we can do. So remember last week we saw how the Israelites had crossed the Jordan River. And now before things can really get underway, two things need to happen. I want to say something about both, and then we'll take a look at them as two parts of a whole. But notice how Joshua 5 begins. This is Joshua 5, verse 1. As soon as the kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites, who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel until they'd crossed over, their hearts melted, and there was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. Now, 5:1 here is a really important verse, and a lot could be said about it. I'll just say a couple things. Notice that we're already told how this story basically is going to play out, right? If you don't know anything about the book of Joshua and you're reading it for the first time, 5:1 is already tipping you off as to how this story is going to turn out, right? And here's how it's going to turn out. Because of the fact that the Ark of the Covenant has divided the water of Jordan, and because the people of Israel have miraculously crossed over, the will of the kings of the Amorites who are on the west side of the Jordan River and the kings of the Canaanites who are the city-states along the Mediterranean coast, their sort of will to resist has gone, it's vanished. And I like the word that, this is the English ESV translation here, their hearts melted. Their sort of sense of strength, resistance, melted away because there was no longer any spirit left in them. Now this is also really important because it also tells us that, as I've tried to emphasize before, that while we're going to be reading about various battles and various events, the key thing here is not Israel's military strategy, Israel's courage, Israel's advanced military technology, because basically none of those exists. The key thing here that's operative from the beginning is the work of God. And Joshua is going to drive this home again and again and again. One way I think to understand what's going on here, and this is like the whole narrative of Joshua, is to think about the 98th Psalm. I'm going to read part of it to you because I think it kind of puts us in the right frame of mind to think about what's going on there. So listen very carefully to Psalm 98. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done marvelous things. His right hand and his holy arm have worked salvation for him. The Lord has made known his salvation. He has revealed his righteousness in the sight of the nations. Everyone, right? He's remembered his steadfast love and faithfulness to the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. That is, the idea here is that what's happening, right, is this is a continuation of what happened in the Exodus from Egypt. God's purpose isn't just to deliver the people of Israel from Egypt. Just as God's purpose here is not simply to settle the people of Israel in Canaan. God's larger purpose is to reveal himself to the world. And that action's going to really get underway once we get to the book of Acts. And of course, as we all know, right, it's still going on today. That's what we're about, right? That's kind of like our job. So really important to keep all that in context. So two things need to happen now before the story can really get underway. And let's take a look at both of them. So the first thing happens in Joshua 5:2. And here it is. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel a second time. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath Halera'oth. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. all the males of the people who came out of Egypt, all the men of war, had died in the wilderness on the way after they had come out of Egypt. Though all the people who came out had been circumcised, yet all the people who were born on the way in the wilderness after they had come out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the people of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nation, the men of war who came out of Egypt, perished because they did not obey the voice of the Lord. So notice what happens. This period of 40 years in the wilderness is not just sort of like an arbitrary time. It's not like God just says, well, I'm going to punish them, right? They're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 dadgum years, and I'm going to really get at them now. No, the purpose is to allow that kind of unfaithful Exodus generation to die off. And so now, one of the things that has to happen before the people can really kind of get underway with settling the land is all the men need to be circumcised. Now, when you think about it, right, militarily, this sounds sort of like a really stupid thing. Okay, this would be like, let's say I'm commanding an army and we're going into battle in like an hour. And I say, okay, guys, before we go into battle, here's what we're going to do. You're all going to get a vision test. So all your eyes are going to be dilated. And for the next 7 hours, your vision will be extremely blurry, but we're still going into battle. That's probably when most of my army would say, hey, look, you're on your own. I'm getting out of here. You don't know what you're doing. Once again, right, this is emphasizing the fact that God's in control. That's why this can be done. So I just want to say just a quick word about circumcision, just kind of so we kind of remember its significance. You may remember that circumcision is instituted back in Genesis 17, remember? And it's the sign of the covenant that exists between God and his people. The other reason why it's significant in this context is, if you remember back to the book of Exodus, if you are a man and you are not circumcised, you may not join in the celebration of the Passover. And they're just about to celebrate the Passover, so that's another reason why this is important. But there's another thing we don't want to kind of forget here. In Deuteronomy 30, you may remember that eons ago, in Deuteronomy 30, we get this interesting idea, right, that Moses tells the people of Israel to circumcise their hearts. Right? That is, the idea here is that circumcision is like a physical thing, but it kind of is a sign of something that should exist inside someone. Circumcision is a sign of dedication, of reverence, of obedience, of being yielded to God. So it takes place now before basically anything really happens. This has to happen for the people of Israel. And something really interesting is said at the end of that section. This is Joshua 5:9. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." So the name of that place is called Gilgal to this day. And Gilgal is kind of a play on the Hebrew word, which means to kind of like roll away. The shame, the reproach of Egypt has been rolled away, removed from you. And this is probably a reference to Numbers 14. You may remember, we spent some time talking about this. Remember what happens in Numbers 14, 1 through 4? People of Israel get out into the wilderness. Remember what they do? They don't say, "Hallelujah, thanks be to God. We've been delivered from Egypt. Go, God. This is really great. Moses is a great leader. We are just so happy to be free." They say, "This is the wilderness. It's a really stupid idea to come out here. Whose idea was that? It was Moses' idea. Moses, what are you doing? Let's elect a whole new leader and let's just go back to Egypt where everything was just lovely." That's the reproach of Egypt, right? It's the reproach of a people who are ungrateful and unfaithful. And they're told here now that that has been removed from them, and now they can go on. So that's one thing. The second thing that has to happen is the celebration of the Passover. And it's really quite brief. It's Joshua 5:10. While the people of Israel were in camp in Gilgal, they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month, in the evening on the plains of Jericho. And the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. And the manna ceased the day after they ate the produce of the land, and there was no longer manna for the people of Israel, but they ate the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. So we got a number of really important things happening here. So second thing that happens, right, is they celebrate the Passover. And once again, right, remember that section in Exodus 12 through 13 is really important, right, because the Passover is the celebration of Israel's deliverance from Egypt. But now it takes on a second dimension. Passover is not just about being delivered from, it's also about being delivered to the promised land. So we just want to keep this in mind, right? We want to keep in mind, right, that hereafter, as Israel gathers together to celebrate the Passover, they're going to be looking for the great and final Exodus that is going to deliver them, capital D, out of this current sinful order and into the land of promise. So, right, it's not coincidental that Jesus institutes the new covenant in the context of the new Passover. This is the new covenant in my blood. So just kind of keep that in mind for a while. But back here to the people of Israel. Remember that one of the instructions for the Passover was, when your children ask you, why are we doing this? Here's what you'll tell them. You will tell them that we're celebrating this because with an outstretched arm and a mighty hand, the Lord our God delivered us from slavery to Pharaoh, king of Egypt. The Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, delivered us from the world's most powerful country and set us free. Now let's think about these two things together. Circumcision, Passover. Let's think about them sort of as conjoined together. Why are these two things really important as the people begin to settle into the land? And I think the answer is this. The most important resource that Israel has, the most important weapon, if you will, that Israel has, the thing that is most necessary as the people begin to sort of settle in the promised land is not great generals, great military strategy, courageous people, superior military technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're being told here that the most important and powerful resource that the people of Israel have is faithfulness. Faithfulness. The most important and powerful resource that the people of God have as they go out into what seemingly is a hostile world is faithfulness. That's it. That's the most important resource. That's the most important weapon. That's what the people of Israel are really marching into Canaan with. And finally, it's the only thing they have. But of course, that's enough, given who it's faith in, right? That's the really important part. So that's really, this is all really significant. Also, notice one thing here, and this is, I think, too, something that really needs to be underlined. Notice the day after the Passover, the manna stops. And they eat the fruit of the promised land as a people for the first time. Now, this is significant, right? Because the manna has been provided to Israel from their crossing the Red Sea now to this very moment, to where they've crossed the Jordan. And it's sort of a way of being reminded, right? How did you endure these past 40 years? What's brought you to this point? Is it because you're also persevering? Is it because you're also faithful? Is it because you're also brilliant? Is it because you've all got such strong character? Or of course we know that none of that's the answer, right? Because we know what's happened. So what's made this journey possible? Well, there's only one thing that's made it possible. And that is the mercy of God, physically represented in the manna. And we talked about manna when we looked at Exodus 16, but we just want to remember, right? Remember the initial reaction to the manna? Even the word kind of hints at remember the word manna simply means something like, what is it? It's like, you've gone out to some restaurant, you've just kind of done an eeny, meeny, miny, mo on the menu, and, the waiter brings you what you ordered, and you're looking at it and you say, what is it? Right? What did I just order? So there's suspicion, right? And then there's even like complaint, right? Come on, we're tired of this manna. It's manna this, manna that. I've blown through my cookbook. 150 ways to cook manna. Let's move on to something else. The manna here represents God's mercy and generosity, which has gotten them out of Egypt and to the promised land. And now it stops, not because God's ceasing to be generous, but because now they can eat the fruit of the land. There's a wonderful practice in the Orthodox Church that actually is sort of drawn from this thing here that I think we could be mentioned. So in the Orthodox Church, Orthodox capital O, as in Russian and Greek churches. In the Orthodox Church, infants are baptized and confirmed simultaneously. The Orthodox don't wait to do confirmation until children are older, so it takes place all at once. And so one of the things that happens is, after the children have been baptized, confirmed using the oil, then the priest gives the infant a spoon which has in it part of a communion wafer mixed with milk and honey, welcoming the infant to the promised land. Right? You've arrived. Here you are. You're here now. Okay? So this is kind of what's going on here, I think, in a really powerful way. Now let's take a quick look here at what happens next. This next scene, I think, is really interesting. It's one of these things in the Old Testament, right, that I think resists sort of like easy explanation, and so I'm not going to try and give it an easy explanation. So here we go. This is the final scene in Joshua 5. And this is 5:13 to 15. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him, with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or our adversaries?" In other words, Joshua says, "Okay, whose side are you on, buddy?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place we are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now there's a number of things going on here, and we just want to kind of, as I said, this is one of these kind of places that kind of resists kind of making it easy and comprehensible and that sort of thing, so I'm not going to try. But this does remind us, right, of something that happens in the 18th chapter of Genesis. Remember Abraham is sitting in his tent one day, and these three men approach him. And if you read what happens, it's really interesting. It's almost kind of confusing, because at one moment, Abraham addresses them as if they were one person. In the next sentence, he addresses them as if they were three. And then they speak simultaneously as three people and then also as one. So the question is, okay, are these three men or one man, or who are they? As like an angel, or is it God, or who knows? Once again, it's sort of left somewhat nebulous. But I think that the thing that we want to notice here is what the commander of the army of the Lord says. Joshua's question is, whose side are you on? And the commander of the Lord's army doesn't say yes or no, right? Are you on our side, or are you on our enemy's side? And the answer of the commander of the Lord's army is yes, right? That is, it's refusing to answer the question as asked. And I don't think that this is like being evasive or something like that. I think it's making a really profound theological statement. The commander of the Lord's army isn't on Israel's side. He's not on the enemy's side. He's on God's side. And there's a really important message in there, right? The really important message here is that God, as I was trying to say last time, isn't simply sort of like Israel's mascot. God has his own agenda. And he's not just simply on Israel's side to kind of cheer them on to victory, or to like do whatever they want, or to act in ways that's going to make this settling in Canaan as easy and comfortable as possible. God has his own agenda, and things are going to stay that way. And Israel kind of needs to know that. And once Joshua is clear on that, and this is where Joshua kind of is a model, right? The commander of the Lord's army says to Joshua, and this is really important, right? Because we've heard this phrase before. Where have we heard the phrase? Oh, and by the way, you need to take off your shoes because you're standing on holy ground. Those, of course, were the exact words that God spoke to Moses at the burning bush. And now they're spoken to Joshua. And so Joshua does that. He takes off his sandals, and he realizes, right, that somehow, in some mysterious way, he's in the presence of God, and he yields. And so I think one of the things that we're certainly getting here, right, is, once again, Joshua is sort of being held up as a model. And I think this is something that, is kind of like hard for us to fully grasp, right? Because in Joshua, we see two qualities that in our culture are often seen as opposites, right? On one hand, we see Joshua having the qualities of humility and obedience. On the other hand, we also see Joshua having the qualities of strength and courage. And in this way of thinking, those two things aren't opposites. Now, they are opposite if you think of strength and courage as sort of being, funded or driven in a kind of egocentric way, right? The reason why I'm courageous is because I know down deep in my heart that I am the greatest man in the world. That'd be one way of thinking about it, right? And that would be wrong. So one of the really interesting things in Joshua, and of course we're going to want to watch the same thing in Jesus himself, right, is we see this interesting blend of humility, humbleness, but also this kind of iron strength and courage, right? The idea is, of course, that faith produces both. Faith produces this interesting blend of humility, but also strength. So Joshua here is not humble in the sense of, well, I'm just Joshua, and I really don't know anything about military stuff or anything about leadership, and I don't really have a whole lot of ideas about what's really going on here, but if y'all want to follow me, I'll try to do my best. No, that's not what we see at all. We see this really important combination of humility and strength. Both of them are the products of faith. Now, we've got, we're almost out of time. So let me just say a word, an introduction about 6, and then we'll take a look at it next week, because 6 is really important. 6, of course, is a story that we've all heard, and we've all like sung songs in Vacation Bible School. This is the Battle of Jericho. And so we want to kind of be, a little bit of warning here, right? We always have to be on our guard when we're familiar with a passage of Scripture, because, we tend to think we already know what it means. And so, whenever we're hearing a sermon on it or a lesson on it, right, our minds tell us, you already know this. Click, right? I know that none of you ever does that, but there are like lesser Christians out there who do it, but not you. So we'll want to kind of remember here and think carefully, what's really going on in the Battle of Jericho? What's this really about? And I just want to kind of give one little hint, and then we'll take a look at it next week. It's really important to notice that the main thing that happens at the end of the story is that the walls of the city collapse. And that's just not like smart military strategy or something like that, right? From the beginning, the formidable thing about the Canaanite cities is they're walled. Israel has no experience of walled cities, right? The people of Israel have been slaves, and now for the past 40 years, they've essentially been kind of a nomadic shepherding people. Walled, fortified cities are like way, way out of their experience, and they're like afraid of them, right? It's like, finding a battle in which, you're fighting with, a .22 caliber rifle, and the enemy has tanks. Right? It's like horrifying. So God deliberately demolishes the thing about the Canaanite city that most frightens Israel and seems to be the sort of the symbol of its strength. Well, those Canaanite walled cities think they're so powerful and so sophisticated and so mighty. Let's just see how long that lasts. And the walls fall down. So we want to kind of read the story with that in mind. That is, God is doing two things simultaneously, right? On one hand, he's showing the people of Israel that he's with them. He's also showing that the kind of the Canaanite regime, walled cities, kings, bronze armor, the whole 9 yards, the latest military technology, that's not going to do them any good. Because they're not fighting against the people of Israel, they're fighting against God. So that'll be really important as we take a look at the Battle of Jericho. And if you want to, we'll sing Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho or something like that. If you really want to sing that, we'll do it.